from the Alliance for Clean Energy of New York. Familiar with many of you, I'm sure, but we have 152 people viewing us now. So I'm sure there's some of you I don't know. Why are we having a virtual town hall on transmission? So ACE New York is a nonprofit organization promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency in New York State. And we work in concert with many environmental groups that have the same goals, as well as our member companies that are companies that want to invest in renewable energy and clean energy and energy efficiency in New York. There are a lot of pieces to the puzzle in making that happen. New York has very ambitious goals, and to reach them, there's a lot of different things that have to happen, and one of them is transmission investments. And I think there's many people who might care about clean energy but haven't spent any time thinking about transmission. So we have a great program today to talk about this issue. We are going to have welcoming remarks from Senator Parker, but he has not joined us yet. So I will first invite you to watch a very short video, and then we'll come back. And I'll turn it over to Kaylee Bankston, if Senator Parker is still not here at that time, we will.
To achieve those goals, we need to build.
That's the video. All right, let's, with that, Michaela, why don't you share your screen and we can show the very short video.
Great, sorry about that.
New York has great, ambitious goals for green jobs, for clean energy, and for climate action. But to achieve those goals, we need to build wind and solar projects, and we need to do it fast and efficiently. That's why we need a better process that is efficient and still protects New York's environment.
Thanks for that. So as I mentioned, oh, Senator Parker has joined the meeting.
I have.
You have, okay. In that case, I'm going to turn it over to Kaylee Bankston from Invenergy to introduce Senator Parker.
Hey, hello, everyone. My name is Kaylee Bankston. As Ann said, I'm the Manager of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Invenergy, a leading renewable energy developer. And I'm here speaking to you today in my role as the Chair of the Board of Directors for the Alliance of Clean Energy. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to welcome you all today to today's virtual town hall to discuss the important and timely issue of investing in New York's transmission system to advance New York's nation-leading climate goals. To kick off the town hall, I am very pleased to introduce Senator Kevin Parker, who will give some opening remarks. Senator Parker represents the 21st District in the New York Senate, where he was first elected in 2002. His district consists of diverse communities in Brooklyn. So as you can imagine, Senator Parker has likely been very busy with two critical and timely issues, responding to the health crisis caused by COVID-19 and responding to protests of police discrimination. I saw most recently that he's been leading the Senate in passing police reform legislation. So we'd like to take a minute to thank you, Senator Parker, for your leadership in those areas. And we're very appreciative that you were able to make some time today to say a few words on the important issue of making the connection between building a robust transmission system in New York in order to meet the climate and energy goals. We've asked Senator Parker to open up the town hall today because in addition to being the Senate Majority Whip, Senator Parker is also the chair of the Senate Energy and Telecommunications Committee, and he's been a strong supporter of bills that support ACE New York's mission. This leadership includes supporting the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, passed in 2019, that established New York's nation-leading climate and energy, clean energy goals. The Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth Act, passed earlier this year, which reformed siting of large-scale renewables and focused on the importance of advancing and upgrading transmission to meet the climate goals. And not to be forgotten, the Tier 2 bill to support baseline renewable energy generators, which Senator Parker sponsored last year. So again, thank you, Senator Parker. We thank you for your leadership, and I'm pleased to now pass the virtual microphone to you to give a few opening remarks. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Senator Kevin Parker.
Thank you very much, Kaylee. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be making a big announcement today that Kaylee is actually leaving her current positioning and going to be following me around the state, announcing me to all places. And I want to thank her. I think that was the best introduction I've ever had. So thank you very much. I'm sure I don't live up to it. And, you know, all of you, when you see me next time, you're going to be like, we heard that in that introduction. We thought you'd be taller. And great to see you, even virtually. I want to thank you all at ACE for, one, the important work that you've been doing, and also to, you know, thank you for including me in this important conversation. I'm hoping that everybody's family and friends are healthy and well. We're, as always, we're kind of reminding people that we're still in the midst of COVID. That this event is an epoch, that, you know, there's going to be 3 periods in all of our lives now, before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. And so all the work that we're going to be doing now is in a particular context, and hopefully, you know, we'll all be able to adjust our business models and our ways of operating to fit within the context of that of this new reality that we all kind of face. And so first, in the context of the importance of transmission, I agree with the premise, right? That we are going to need more transmission if we're going to meet the goals of the CLCPA. The CLCPA is the most aggressive set of climate standards in the entire nation, probably the world. And we certainly are very proud of them. But now the hard work has begun, which is how do we actually meet the goals? And so I very much believe that transmission is going to be really critical in that. And I think more importantly, obviously organizations like ACE are going to be leading the charge, right? Because they're uniquely positioned to take advantage of the market and to advance those goals. And there's an important part of this that we have to also understand, is that this is happening in a time in which we've been also plunged, not just in the context of our health, but our economy has also been slowed way down. Right. And we look at where we're going to produce full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits. And I've been saying this for a while, even before now, I think it's even more true in this moment. It is that the clean energy economy is the next best place to, in fact, do that. And obviously, if some of you have noticed, I'm African-American. And so obviously in African-American and Latino communities, we're, you know, 41% of the businesses that closed during COVID are not going to reopen. You know, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be looking for work. And again, we're going to need people, and we need people already. In fact, you know, if you just take one industry, you just look at solar, for instance, part of what the high cost of solar is in our state is literally directly related to the labor costs and to the fact that, you know, having people with the requisite skills to do solar development are just not as plentiful as we'd like to have them be. And so this becomes an opportunity, right? And so I'm reminded that in Chinese that the character for obstacle and the character for opportunity is the same character. And so that there is a real opportunity here for ACE and for the industries represented by ACE to take advantage, to lead the charge in terms of bringing New York State's economy back, and simultaneously helping us look after our environment while reducing the energy costs of people and providing the much needed and increased energy need that we're facing here in the state. And so, you know, we're going to need transmission. We need ACE to help lead that charge for it. And we need to produce full-time jobs at living wage with benefit. And we have to, you know, produce more green using less green, right? And so we're going to need not only this transmission work going to be important, but we're going to need to find a way to fund it. One of the bills that I actually have that was not mentioned is the carbon pricing plan, and certainly would love ACE's support and endorsement of that. And recently had a conversation with the Westchester County Legislature about their analysis of that bill and ways that we can you know, get that going, because we certainly think that becomes a funding source for the goals that we have in CLCPA. So again, thank you for including me in this conversation. I'm hoping that that we get back to a regular session sometime soon, and that we can get back to dealing with some of these energy bills. We've dealt with some things related to COVID. We've dealt with a whole package of things on police reform. There's still probably much things to be done on both of those two fronts. But there's a lot of other areas that we still also, as a state legislature, need to address before the year is out, including energy. And looking forward to working with all of you to pass some of these bills and make them law, so we can not only address the issues of a clean energy economy, but also make this state a leader, not just in terms of flattening the curve, but also increasing the economic activity and getting out the U.S.'s engine up and running. So, and thank you to all the members of ACE. And I don't know if you want me to take questions or stick around, but I can love to be part of the conversation that we're engaged in.
You are very welcome to stick around. We're not going to do questions now. We're going to keep rolling. But it's so good to see you, although it's a little unsettling to see you without a bow tie. So.
I was going to wear a bow tie, and it was so hot today. I was just like, yeah.
I can understand that.
When Bart didn't have one on, I feel like I made the right decision. So
good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So before I announce or introduce our keynote speaker, we're going to show another short video, not too long, and then we will introduce Mr. Zaidi.
New York State has made historic commitments to fight climate change by setting ambitious targets for renewable electricity. By law, we need to achieve 70% renewable electricity by 2030, just 10 years from now. New York's climate law, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, is already changing the way we make and move electricity. Clean electricity is New York's energy future. Over the past decade, New York has been slowly bringing more renewable energy online. 10 years ago, there was almost no solar and very little wind power in New York. Now, we have both, and they are pollution-free. 22,000 New Yorkers work in this industry. All New York's coal plants have been closed down. Thanks mostly to hydropower, renewable electricity makes up over a quarter of all power used in New York. But wind and solar is still a small fraction. What's holding us back? One problem is our outdated transmission system. It can't move much of the clean energy from where it's made to where it is needed, especially downstate New York. Existing transmission lines are simply not up to the task. Meanwhile, old, polluting fossil fuel power plants have been retired and must be replaced. Much of our grid is over 40 years old. We need to update the grid and bring wind and solar power from far-flung parts of our state to where it will be used. Most of these upgrades can be in existing rights-of-way and can use smart from the start principles to protect New York's valuable natural resources. Before too long, New York's power grid will be adding clean electricity made offshore by wind turbines in the Atlantic Ocean. This will also require new investments in New York's grid. What does all this add up to? We need to act quickly to make our grid ready for these changes. As part of a new law passed in 2020, New York will be studying what our grid needs to achieve our goals. This report, by law, should be completed by the end of 2020. It will identify existing and future bottlenecks in the grid and propose ways to overcome them. These transmission traffic jams must be overcome if all New Yorkers are to benefit from clean energy and new jobs. Wind, solar, hydropower, and battery storage. This is New York's clean energy future. This is where today's investment is going. These are the industries that will create jobs and ensure New York does its part in the fight against climate change. As we build the grid of the future, the better connected we are, the stronger we will be. Climate action requires clean energy, and in New York, clean energy requires a new and improved electric grid. Let's work together to get the job done.
Okay, thank you so much. So that was our introduction to the issue that we're talking about today. I should have said in the beginning that the people you see on screen are the organizers and speakers at today's event. I would suggest that you put your Zoom in speaker mode rather than gallery view so that it will focus on the person who's speaking. And with that, it's my pleasure to announce Zaidi. In the midst of this really painful COVID-19 crisis, he started at New York State in the Office of the Governor. He is the new Deputy Secretary for Energy and Environment and also the Chairman of Climate Policy and Finance. So he has a big portfolio in New York State over energy and environmental issues. And he joined the state at a time when there's a lot going on in that arena, even before the current crisis that we're facing. So he had a big job to jump into, and we're so glad that he was willing to take some time today to join us. Just also by way of introduction, he is a lawyer. He is an adjunct on the adjunct faculty at Stanford and was a fellow at Columbia. He's recently been at 2 different law firms, Kirkland & Ellis and Morrison and Forster. But he did serve 8 years, I believe, although you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the Obama administration, working both for the Department of Energy, for OMB, and for the Domestic Policy Council in the White House. So he comes with a incredible wealth of energy knowledge, and we're so happy to have him bring that skill to the Empire State. So I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anne, for that introduction. And it's so good to be on with you and hopefully meet many of you in person at some point in the not too distant future. As Anne said, you know, joining at such a remarkable moment in the history of this state, the history of this country, where we have, with the governor's leadership and really just the incredible hard work of the people of New York, taken on the challenge that was presented by this pandemic. And now is the time that we turn the corner and build back stronger and better, get our economy going again, keep our people healthy, and look at ways to emerge from this crisis stronger than we were when it found us. To follow to Senator Parker's points about the incredible position that the state finds itself in, such an incredible volume of work over just the last year, if not the last decade, in transforming the sources of energy that have powered our grid in particular. Really, as we look out at the goals that the governor has set for the state and that have been codified in the climate law, at the heart of that is 2 things. One, a dramatic transformation of the grid to 100% clean. And the second is an expansion of that grid to reach more and more sectors of the economy. One of our most powerful tools in decarbonizing buildings, in decarbonizing industry, and decarbonizing transportation is to back out existing sources of energy in those sectors and replace it with electrons that are generated in a clean way. So what all of you do is so critical to the transformation that we need, a transformation that is demanded by the science, a transformation that could not come more quickly for the communities that have been breathing in and suffocating under the pressure of the pollutants that have persisted as a cost of doing business for us for so long. And it could not come at a better time because these are some of the easiest, fastest, best paying, most durable jobs that we can create as an economy. So it all really works well together to present an opportunity we should all be excited about. And at the heart of that is not only generating more and more renewable electrons here in the state, but also figuring out ways to debottleneck them and move them across the state through short spurs and longer lines, through transmission on the bulk power side and in the distribution side. It's not just enough to have the solution. The key is getting the solution to where it needs to go on the grid. And that is core to the strategy. So 3 things I wanted to just outline as critical to that work, and then would love to take any questions that you may have. First is really the build out of the transmission capacity where we know we already need it. So the improvements to siting and permitting, the efforts that so many of you have pushed for and pioneered, that's going to be critical. And we have hundreds of miles of power lines that are on their way to being built in the state in the very near term, and we need to bird dog that progress and make sure it is done on time. So that's a critical thing that we must do is build what we know we already need to build and what is fairly far along in the development process. The second is to use data and analysis to inform places where we are going to speed up additional build out. We've got a number of studies underway and we are working vigorously across the state to coordinate that analysis and the engagement requisite with all of you to figure out where we need to build more highway, where we need to build on-ramps and exits on the electron highway. So that's the second critical piece of business, and it's going to require both north-south capacity, capacity into Zone J for the nerds on the call. I love the way the New York ISO captured it. We've got a tale of 2 grids in this state with 3/4 of the power in Zone J and downstate coming from fossil-fired sources, and the inverse being true upstate. That's a feature of transmission constraints, and it's a real opportunity for upstate renewables and developers to help us solve that problem. So it's got to be both north-south, and it's got to be east-west, and it's got to be both focused on giving access to electrons that are generated onshore as well as those generated offshore. And then the third prong of the strategy is to leverage all the other tools that we have to get after this challenge of a grid that is both decarbonized, but then also delivers on all the attributes we've become accustomed to from our power sector. One thing that happened during the COVID crisis is the thing that didn't happen, and that is the power never went out. The lights didn't go out. The hospitals never were looking around to see how they were going to keep the equipment running. And it's because of the work that all of you are involved in. It's because the folks that work day in and day out at generation stations and on transmission lines and on the upkeep and operation and maintenance of this incredible infrastructure did their jobs quietly, head down and kept doing it. And that's why we didn't have to worry about that. But it's, all of those attributes are critical. And the way we solve for that is not just through new generation and transmission, but also through integration of things like storage, demand side, agility through demand response, through a clear rules of the road on net metering so that we can have more distributed resources come online, and through massive investment in cutting down energy waste and figuring out how to electrify more appliances on the demand side. So that's the strategy, and we've got to take advantage of all the resources we have to get after it, to create the incredible job potential that comes with that. Even just 1 mile of transmission comes with 10 to 15 jobs. Those tend to be $30 to $40 an hour union jobs. So, this is something that we should all be excited about. And it should be the way that we both solve for climate, but then also solve for both the economic crisis that is most recent, but also the economic crisis that's been persistent, which is the one that's left opportunity out of reach for so many of our fellow New Yorkers, in particular in communities that have been struggling with environmental injustice. So that's the vision. It's the governor's vision. It's something we are doggedly going after and focused on implementation. And I know, and you're a great partner, and all of your members are critical to the success of that vision.
Thank you so much. Appreciate those remarks. I was going to ask one question before we turn over to the panel, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just thinking one of the biggest challenges in transmission planning and getting the investment we need is that the system has historically been set up that you look at the grid and you see if there's any problems with congestion, and then you try to fix them. But you're looking at the grid that you have. But what we're trying to do now is looking at the grid that we are going to have. It makes it more challenging to know, exactly where the renewables will be and exactly who should pay for it. And so I guess my question is, how is New York going to cope with that, or what you see are the big challenges around that planning, changing how we do planning, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to work backwards from two realities. One where we see demand and demand growth, and that's got to internalize our clearest vision and sense of where we're going to be on things like electrification, transportation sector, and in buildings. So we've got to have a very clear and firm grasp on where we think demand is going to be, what it's going to look like, what's the shape of that demand, when does it come, what time of the day, is it very peaky because we're doing a lot of charging, and it just hits the system on the local level in a different way. So we've got to think about that. And by the way, to the extent we can have grid tiable assets on the transportation side, we should go for that. And then the second thing we've got to work back from is, where do we think the highest resource potential is? And part of that is the zones we've identified offshore. It's part of it is the opportunities we've identified with large scale renewables. Part of it is build ready, and the streamlining of sites that are not being utilized otherwise, and getting them ready to produce. So it's a clear sense on what the demand side looks like, a clear sense of where the richest supply is. And then we've got to recognize that it's in the public benefit to tie those two things together in the future. And the time to tie together that future supply and that future demand is now. If we don't build the connective tissue on the infrastructure side, then we're not going to live the best version of that future that we've described for ourselves. So that's how we're trying to do that analytically. That's why we've got a bunch of studies going, but they all come together. And my big rule on analysis is you can't do analysis without, for this sort of stuff, without a map. So it's all got to sort of trace back to location, and then we got to think about where we need to lay the infrastructure that's going to enable this vision to be possible.
Thanks so much for that. I'm one of the nerds that reads all those analysis. Yeah, I'm
no, thank you.
breath.
Thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you for your leadership on the Climate Action Council and for your great work in counseling the state on the best way to approach this in your capacity there. And thank you to all of your members for creating the jobs that have come with this transformation so far, and the jobs that will come with this transformation going forward. It's so meaningful for the workers, for the families, for the communities they support. So thank you.
Thanks so much. So we are going to switch over to our panel now. And I will say, for all of the 226 people who are listening in, thank you again for joining. Each panelist is going to speak for 5 minutes, and then we're going to go to questions. So if you could post your questions in the Q&A, now's the time to start doing that. And I will introduce all 3 panelists at once. And then so when one finishes, the next can start. So first we will have Bart Frannie. He is the Director of Transmission Planning, Asset Management, Systems and Data at National Grid. So he has a big portfolio there and has worked in New York State on energy issues for a good long time. We appreciate all that he's done. National Grid has a lot of renewable proposals in their territory. So he's an expert at knowing what the challenges are in getting those projects interconnected. Second, we have Rodica Donaldson. She's the Senior Director for Commercial Transmission and Analytics for Edf Renewables North America. So EDF is a member of ACE, which I'm happy to say, and has invested quite a bit in New York in a variety of wind and solar projects. So we appreciate that. And she's going to speak about the experience that EDF has had and through that, their knowledge of transmission issues. And Ryan Pichet is with the Lewis County Manager in beautiful Lewis County, New York, which is home to the largest wind project in New York State, and also hosts us on our renewable energy tour that we usually do in a bus, and this year we'll be doing online. So they have a lot of on-the-ground experience in Lewis County with renewables development. So we appreciate all 3 of the panelists joining, and we are going to start with Bart.
Okay. Thanks, Ann, and thanks to the ACE members for inviting me to participate on today's town hall. I'm Bart Frannie, Director at National Grid, and I think really that prior question that you were asking, Ann, really is a good segue into my presentation, and perhaps Michaela can share that. Thank you. So today, I'm just going to quickly summarize really an evolution of transmission planning. We have today's system, and then we have lessons learned from my team at National Grid, which consists of transmission planning and asset managers. And then we'll take some of those lessons learned that we discovered through some of our initiatives at National Grid and apply them to some concepts where I think would help enable renewable energy in the future. So next slide, please. So for today's system, and this will just be a quick summary here, I think most people know that the interconnection points that can efficiently accommodate large renewable generation projects in upstate New York are becoming much harder to find. They are, and part of the reason of that is generation development and transmission development are largely siloed. New flow patterns across the networks are creating a growing issue of curtailments in renewable energy. And generation development continues to outpace those of transmission. The result is a suboptimal solution for ratepayers. Next slide, please. So to address those issues, National Grid has been looking at this for the better part of 2 years. And what we've examined is parts of our local network, or referred to as byways, and focusing on creating upgrades that are available to deliver renewable resources to the bulk or the highways. These studies assumed light load conditions with an objective of minimizing curtailments, and it resulted in some really exciting opportunities around optimally sizing upgrades using a REC-based benefit approach. The program that we're discussing at National Grid is called Multi-Value Transmission, or MVT. They're network solutions that effectively address both the transmission needs for the core business, which is primarily reliability, providing safe service, meeting capacity needs to serve load, but they also address state transmission needs in the form of ensuring renewable energy deliverability. MVT programs, though, or solutions, are largely byway solutions. What we've discovered when we were analyzing our systems and identifying these projects is that in some cases, the least cost byway solution would in fact be a greenfield project used specifically to deliver renewables. We refer to them as collector stations, but they would really be a form of integrated resource planning, or IRT. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, National Grid fully supports the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, or the ACT. It is very helpful in identifying a process to address bulk transmission upgrades, or those highway needs. Those highway needs support broader markets efficiently, and they support highway deliverability, which is to say any facility that wants to interconnect to a facility rated at 200 kV and above, these highway solutions will be tremendous benefit. However, there's still a gap on how best to address those byway needs. And as we alluded to as part of our lessons learned, some of that IRP where you could eliminate those silos of generation awards and transmission planning would provide huge benefits, and we believe at a lower cost than just performing network upgrades on existing systems. So to get to that point though, it's critical to understand where the generation is going to be built. The transmission needs would have to follow that. And then the generation deliverability, that's how much energy the generation can actually produce at a known quantity out to the highways from the byways, would be known. We see it as sufficient scale economies. It provides the lowest delivered dollar per megawatt hour, at least in our case studies. That's what it was showing. You could also know that from a REC award perspective, you could cap how much would be awarded into these collector sites. And there is a known export quantity there. This would be something that should be overseen by the state. Some of the challenges, they're all too familiar for us who've worked in New York for any amount of time. Cost allocation, these are basically public policy projects benefiting the greater good of New York. Cost recovery for utilities that would be building some of these byway needs, that would be need to be addressed. The cost of these projects, while we estimate some of these collector sites would have the capability to deliver up to 1,000 megawatts, they won't be cheap. And they'll be, you wouldn't need a lot of them either, but it'll be very transparent on the cost. Generation collaboration, you know, how do we get in a competitive environment where developers are competing for, you know, the right geospatial sites, how do we get that information relayed onto us without interfering the market? And also there's no physical rights to those assets once they get built. So open access would still prevail to allow other generators to attach to those collector sites. And overseen by the state, that's a challenge and a benefit. We see it as critical to facilitating this form of IRP, but it also requires the will of some state agency or agencies to basically adopt some form of IRP. And I think we're starting to see positive traction on that, on the make-ready sites that NYSERDA is developing. That is really tailored for this type of approach. But I think that there's limits to that too. So with that, I am done with my prepared remarks.
You're muted, Anne.
Sorry. Thank you, Bart, and thank you for all the work that National Grid has done to do this analysis and try to think of creative ways to get the transmission capacity where we need it. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rodica Donaldson from Edf Renewables.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for the opportunity to talk as part of this important discussion on transmission. Maybe for quick background on EDF, EDF is a global leader in low carbon energy. We have a strong presence in the US, over 1,000 employees. And in New York in particular, we have a pipeline of over 2 gigawatts of solar and storage in different phases of development. We have partnered with Shell Energy for development of offshore wind, and we have a number of solar and wind projects online already. So we are very excited to partner with New York in this transition to clean energy. And on the transmission side, as a developer, what we know is that there are a number of studies that show the high risk on the transmission side. So I'm planning to just uncover a little bit this idea, because the transmission risk is important to renewables. If we have high curtailment, as has been identified even in the latest CARRI study from New York ISO, that means, you know, high risk for us. We cannot be delivered as a low cost energy to loads, and that high risk of congestion and curtailment also means that once the transmission system is reaching capacity, we have curtailment, we have depressed LMPs within that pocket, and that's a financial cost for us. And so as a generator, when we look at developing projects, that can this risk can challenge the ability to secure financing, and even can make the project uneconomic. So for us, a scenario with without transmission investments it's a high risk environment, because the project basically wears that risk of lack of transmission. And as a kind of like savvy developer, we could look at what are the sites that present the least transmission risk. That could be some 345 kV lines or substations. However, when you look at the scale of the need to meet the CLCPA goal, the land availability may be a concern there. So our preferred scenario is the scenario where transmission investments are being done. In this scenario, the curtailment congestion risk is low. And if those transmission investments are planned ahead of time and known to developers, we can make informed decisions where to site generation. So this is why it's very important to have a comprehensive, visionary, kind of like long-term transmission plan, because that transmission and generation can be as a chicken and egg problem, you know, and having a vision for the grid would support adding generation where transmission is available. And unbottling some of the 115 kV highways with forecast as constrained in the future would also mean that more communities can benefit from the development of renewable projects, greater variety of sizes, smaller sizes as well, while at the higher voltage, you can only look at large size projects. And it also means more competition in the renewable development landscape. So kind of like wrapping up very briefly, we believe that there have been some commendable leadership efforts taken by state agencies, the government, legislators to enact and work towards some of the most, actually the most ambitious climate and clean energy targets in the nation. So we are very excited to partner with New York and develop projects here. We welcome the decision that has been done to undertake a power grid study, an NYSERDA and DPS study, and we hope that this will represent the foundation for prioritizing future transmission investments. We believe that those are actually, making investment decisions is very important because that will give us developers the signals that we need to move forward with our developments and develop there where the transmission risk is it's low. And there were questions earlier, you know, you cannot address all the constraints, very likely, might not, so you will have to make informed decisions on what transmission to prioritize. So our thoughts are that, you know, this could be based on what pockets have already, you know, where generation has been already procured based on prior NYSERDA awards, prioritize transmission that represent that have the biggest return in investment in terms of CO2 emission reduction, and look at the multi-value projects that can have additional benefits, not only public policy, but also maybe, you know, it addresses aging infrastructure or other benefits, and those may be both low-hanging fruit upgrades, but also longer-term backbone upgrades that may be required to support the CLCPA goals. And lastly, if those investment decisions are not being done, the risk for us is that we will forecast that transmission risk and we'll have to price it in our evaluation of the project, in our rec bidding, because you cannot go away without pricing that risk. So that could represent higher repair costs, in fact, for not building transmission, because that transmission risk is priced in the value of the projects in order for them to be successfully financed and completed. So there is also a potential cost to ratepayers, because if the grid is developed on a piecemeal fashion, it's a suboptimal versus having a comprehensive visionary expansion of the grid. And without transmission investments, there is risk that those procurements cannot happen. Projects may not be viable or may be delayed, putting at risk the CLCPA targets. And again, you know, not having kind of like limiting the area of development can also limit the benefits that can go to communities across New York. And that completes my presentation. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, that brings us to Ryan.
Well, thanks, Anne. No slides for me. This is the boots on the ground portion of the panel, I suppose. Just a little background on Lewis County. We are home to 27,000 residents over 1,200 square miles. So when you talk about room for green energy growth, this is where it is. It's upstate. It's no offense to Senator Parker, but it's not in Brooklyn. So we're the type of community that's going to be actually, you know, building these green energy projects, and we have been building green energy projects. Lewis County actually is home to 21 hydropower facilities, 3 industrial wind farms, with 2 more that are hopefully under construction in the next couple of years. We have over 300 industrial wind towers in Lewis County right now. This is an opportunity for places like Lewis County. At least that's the way that we have looked at it over the last 15 years as we've developed some of our community and integrated some green energy into our community. Like I said, it's not going to be Brooklyn and Nassau and Westchester, in New York State. They're all going to be net takers. It's going to be places like Lewis that have to be net producers in order for the state's goals to be met. And so we see that as an opportunity where, what we're doing up here in our resources are valuable to the rest of the state. So it's an opportunity for our community to, build some jobs infrastructure. It's an opportunity to build a tax base and more tax revenue. Some of the best part about green energy projects is that they build our tax base and they don't require any more government services. So, that's been part of, the good thing that is, that these developments have brought to Lewis County. With the wind projects that we have currently, we have built our first ever community college in Lewis County. That was completely with tax revenue segregated from the existing wind projects. We have built a new courthouse with those funds. We have built our first modern 911 radio system with those funds. So this is an opportunity for rural communities like ours to really invest, this revenue in developing our community, while at the same time meeting the green energy goals of New York State and helping the folks down in Senator Parker's district to get their energy from a more carbon neutral source. But the only way that can happen is if the grid obviously is able to handle the transmission from Lewis County all the way down to New York City. To us, the important piece about expansion is that, like Rodica had said, it's about comprehensive development plan. So we are concerned about too much solar, overwhelming some of our ag land. We are concerned with making sure that we're preserving pieces of the Adirondack Park and the Tug Hill and the important, rural aspects of our community. But we think we can do both, but we can't do both if development can only be done in a concentrated area. If the grid can support development across our community, then we can identify the areas that we want to grow and we can identify the areas that we want to preserve and make sure it's done in a way that makes sense for the future of our community. So that's how we're approaching it. And again, thanks for having us, Ann.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So we are right on schedule, people. Kudos to you all. That's great. And we do have some questions here. Let's see. Some of these questions are very long, people. Let's see. There's one question that says, can Mr. Frannie say more about how capping RECs would result in better planning?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question, because I didn't want that point to be misconstrued. What we observed at National Grid is that we basically take a three-prong approach to try and isolate out areas where the generation is seeking to interconnect. And that is reviewing ISO interconnection queues, the REC awards, and Article 10s. And when we isolate on a specific county, and we look at things in terms of counties for transmission to see what transmission we have there, where the generation is seeking to interconnect, and what's necessary to upgrade the system to eliminate any potential issues. So the concept that evolved from that was based on what we observed was some of our network is 69 kV, very low voltage. And what we saw was, based on those three options, is that they were the network was overwhelmed with REC awards and interconnection requests. And it appeared to us that that would be better streamlined if NYSERDA knew that a certain area can only support a certain amount of generation and only award up to that limit, rather than going through their queue and their assessment, factor in the transmission availability. And by proactively identifying sites that the generation would lead the transmission to, we would have that understanding, and that's where we would say a better approach is not to overwhelm the network, but cap it. So NYSERDA would have a better view of where the REC awards would go in, and that would meet exactly with the export capability and wouldn't overwhelm it. And then you would pick another site.
Okay, thank you. Couple quick things. If folks could put their questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, so I don't have to keep looking back and forth. That's one. We have a question, will we receive these slides after the webinar? And I believe the answer to that is yes. And the whole recorded webinar will be available on our website. We do have a question or two that was directed directly to Ali Zaidi, but he had to go, so we do not have him here anymore, FYI. Let's see. This is directed to you also, Bart. Can you say a bit more about what are the perceived limitations of NYSERDA's work to identify and prepare build-ready sites? How
Sure.
do you think that program will be limited?
Yeah. Again, it's an excellent concept. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it really gets to what we've been searching for at National Grid, was to understand where the generation is going to be built so we can identify appropriate solutions and maximize the production of those resources in their export out to the bulk. So what I meant by that statement was it has limits based on you know, the 30 gigawatts that's necessary. We see that, and maybe NYSERDA can cover it all with build-ready sites, but in the event that they can't, and if they could even get half that, 15 gigawatts of renewable energy make-ready sites with sufficient transmission planned to deliver the energy produced at those sites, that would be a huge win. But I think there's going to be more that's needed outside the build-ready sites.
Thanks. And Ryan, I'm wondering if from the perspective of local government, you have any thoughts about NYSERDA's proposed Build Ready program. So this is the program where they're going to go around the state and identify sites, prepare them through permitting, and then auction them to private developers. So local government, any reaction on that?
Well, two things. One, that's the type of system you get when your grid is limited, right? You have a limited amount of resources and places to develop, so they become very valuable. And development is more geared toward what the grid can support and not geared toward what makes sense for the regional comprehensive plan of the community. So I have mixed feelings about it. I have mixed feelings about the state's new Office of Renewable Energy siting. I think some of that, should remain in hands of local government. Obviously, that's my position. But I think a more streamlined approach is going to help developers big time, because we've seen projects with EDPF, we've seen projects with Invenergy that have taken years and years and years to get through the Article 10 process. And the fact is, the community wants it, the developer wants it, the state wants it, and it still takes 3 to 5 years. So a streamlined process is good, but I think we can't lose the local perspective. And I think that's why it's important that we expand the grid capability, so that we're not making decisions based on what works for the grid. We're making decisions based on what works best for the community. And that's what we would like to see.
Yeah, I like the way you say that. We want the grid to work for what's best for the community and what's, in our case, what's best for the state's renewable goals too, instead of the other way around. Yep. Okay, we have a question here. What is the scale of these transmission lines, and what are the health impacts of large-scale transmission lines? Either for Rodica or Bart, I guess. Scale of the transmission lines and the health impacts.
Yeah, it would be largely for the type of resources we're committing to. You would need some high voltage transmission to get that scale economy. So anywhere from 345 down to 115 would be the range that I would see the range that I would see transmission lines that would be built to accommodate the renewables. Regarding the health effects, we simply comply with the regulations regarding any health effects that are considered, and a lot of times we more than exceed what is expected of us in terms of any kind of adverse impact on health.
Okay.
And
All right.
I would.
Oh, go ahead.
I would add to that I think it will be a mix. It will have to be a mix of both 345 kV and lower voltage lines as part of the solution and investment program. Some like 345 kV obviously cost more, so it's a cost consideration as well. But they do carry more capacity. So to me, it's all based on the studies that will show the cost benefits of the upgrade, how much renewables, clean energy they allow for, and it will be one criteria. But I think all should be on the table for prioritization.
Okay. So, Rodica, this is a long question. I'm going to direct it to you. It says, grid expansion and modernization is clearly appropriate and necessary to solve for existing and projected bottlenecks. In light of the ISO's Tale of Two Grids and Ali's noted need for expansion north-south, how do we ensure that meeting decarbonization targets are met cost-effectively, given that additional clean energy build-out closer to load downstate may obviate the need for north-south and east-west transmission? How do we model, evaluate, and plan for least cost solutions of aggressive clean energy development closer to load relative to the transmission solutions?
Well, I think the state has already kind of like planned for that when they are targeting 9 gigawatts of offshore wind. That's low cost energy, very close to load, interconnecting into New York City. So that's a very effective way to bring clean energy right where the load is. So I think that's part of the solution. And as part of the studies, the transmission planners, they are doing production cost simulation models. And as part of those studies, they determine what's kind of like efficient for longer distance transfers. So you still need energy energy upstate to kind of like help clean the grid downstate, because that's 2/3 of the load in New York. So but I would say offshore wind is a big part of the solution.
Thank you. I'll add to that, when we, not recently, months ago now, went into DPS to learn about the study they were doing, what stuck in my mind is that they were trying to optimize what's the least cost combination of new transmission, new generation, and storage. And I'm not smart enough to figure that out, but I'm glad that they're looking at it that way. Okay, here's another question. Interconnection limits solar siting. The grid needs to be more available to good sites for large-scale solar. On Long Island, the Nature Conservancy has mapped the best solar sites. We need that information for all of New York to ensure the grid reaches to the best sites and that they're not ruled out because of the distance or difficulty to interconnection. What's being done to ensure this is addressed? So I think this question is mostly agreeing with what Ryan was saying, but any of the three of you want to respond to that one?
I could add to that, and Bart, I'm sure, is going to disagree, but one of the problems is that National Grid's interconnection sites are all proprietary. So we'd love to do more community planning like Long Island is doing and identify, more appropriate sites. We don't know where the grid has capacity and where it doesn't. And I find that a little baffling because the state has pretty much given these, the National Grid and some of these companies a regulated monopoly. So I don't know why we wouldn't be able to have access to that information so that we can make better decisions. So I think that's a disparity of information that is going to have to be resolved both upstate and downstate.
Well, I think the information is available, but it's also difficult to assess the information, is how I would characterize it. You know, there is, it's not our interconnection sites, it's the generation interconnection sites. And it's also very important to get to, and I think we agree mostly, not disagree, is that the transmission should follow the generation. It shouldn't be the other way around. And that is what we're after, is that right now we're largely doing it in a reactive mode. And what we want to be able to do is a proactive mode, because generation is outpacing transmission and we can't react quick enough.
Yeah, I would add that indeed some information is available to us via the transmission interconnection studies, via the transmission planning models. EDF has ProMod in-house to do those transmission studies. So we can, I guess the challenge is finding the sites with good resources where there is local support for projects, and where kind of like when we look at long term, you know, how much more generation will be getting added there, will transmission be there? Because any area could become a congested pocket if you have a lot of generation getting added with no transmission. So I agree with Bart that if you have a comprehensive transmission plan, that plan can guide us where to go with the generation, assuming, you know, all the other pieces, the resource, community support are there. And ideally, that's how you go about it. And maybe just one other example, you know, when you look at all the other markets in the US that have now high renewable penetration, are markets that have undertaken significant transmission expansion. I'm talking about ERCOT with their CREZ program, MISO, they call it MVPs. So all those markets, they have invested significantly in transmission to get where they are in terms of renewable penetration.
Thank you. It is a really knotty planning problem to say, like, National Grid would like to know exactly where all the renewable projects are going. And you can tell NYSERDA you shouldn't award contracts to projects unless there's adequate transmission there. But the projects are going to, you don't know where they're going until they get the NYSERDA contracts. And so it's there's a solution, but it's not easy. We have a question that says, how does net metering factor into this? Is there a way where New York could create a program like Vermont to purchase power from methane gas digesters from farmers and build a grid to help with that? Any of you want to take that one on? Or I could. I'll give a partial answer and then jump in if you'd like. So the transmission challenges have mostly to do with large-scale renewable projects, although community solar, it can be an issue too. If the solar is net metered, which at the moment now is limited to residential solar, then it's not really a transmission issue. And we certainly, at least from ACE's point of view, we need distributed solar, we need grid scale wind and solar, we need offshore wind, we need storage. We really need it all to get to 70% by 2030. On the question about methane gas digesters from farmers, so NYSERDA has had programs to support methane gas digestion, and DEC has had some programs to support methane projects at landfills. Under the climate law that was passed last year, though, these methane gas digesters are no longer defined as renewable. So regardless of our opinions on that, they're not likely to get the same incentives unless that law is modified to include that anaerobic digestion technology and generation of power in that definition of renewable. So let's see. I want to pause to ask if there is any reporters on the line that has any questions. And if so, if you could please put those in the Q&A, because you cannot ask them verbally, but post those questions in the Q&A and we'd be very happy to answer them. What, if any, potential exists to lower the cost of transmission by developing or adopting innovative technologies? Veronica or Bart, maybe?
I can start. EDF is a supporter of advanced technologies like power flow control devices, topology optimization, dynamic line rating. So all of that, I think I would classify it as advanced technology. So I think all of the above should be part of the kind of like equation. And but that's, at times it may replace a traditional upgrade, but it's not going to be always the case. So it's a matter of optimizing the existing system, and that could be done with dynamic line ratings, topology optimization, all of that. But I think where we are here in New York, you need more than that. You need a lot more than that. I think that's so I would say it's part of the solution, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, the non-wire alternatives or storage, electric storage, has great potential. Right now, it's still not cost competitive with a wire solution, at least when we penciled it out, but in transmission case anyways, but it is getting to the point where hopefully in the future it is competitive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We have a question directed to Ryan. Ryan, can you please expand on the issue of solar versus ag land? In particular, have you had any experience with pollinator habitats planted beneath or around the solar arrays?
Okay, I can answer the first half of that question with some intelligence, but not the second. So sorry to the pollinators. Yes, so there's actually a kind of a funny term in local government going around called the solar tsunami. And that is what we are facing. It's knocking on our door right now. And it's not a bad thing. It means that people want to come to our community and develop and do business here. But we have to make sure that we're balancing our future with solar, with our future with agriculture and tourism and, you know, the rural nature of the community. So those are important things that we're tussling with. The best solution would be that we put a premium and work with the state siting board and work with our IDAs, which are doing the tax policy, to incentivize these solar companies to use subprime ag land. So we know what the best ag land is in the county, and we know what, you know, the not so good land is. And so what would be best is if we could, you know, incentivize either through tax policy or through, you know, working with NYSERDA and the state for these developers to work hard to identify pieces that are not prime ag land and are not prime, you know, producers in another sector of our economy, so that we're not sacrificing one form of economy for another. So that's the balance that we've been trying to strike. And I think it's ongoing. There's no easy answer to that question, because a developer comes to a farmer and, you know, makes a proposition about their prime land. They don't make a proposition about the land that's in the back that doesn't have a road to it. So if we can structure the tax incentives so that they that secondary land looks more attractive, those are the types of things that we're trying to do in Lewis County.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about pollinating.
I would add, I'm just a transmission girl, but my colleagues on the development side, I know they have been working and they are working on incorporating sheep grazing, for instance, foraging of bees, creating those critical habitats for bees population. So when we go out in the community, we really want to hear from the farmers, you know, their concerns, how we can protect the land, all the land, like topsoil that is removed, or everything we always work towards replacing so it can be returned to farming. So we do a lot of kind of not use of pesticide, planting wildfires. We are also we are working with the American Solar Grazer Association. So we are trying to be kind of community friendly and farm friendly in our developments, and we definitely support developing some best practices and making those more like a norm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Here's another question for Ryan. Do you think that counties and municipalities should play a more active role in identifying areas of their communities where they would prefer to see clean energy development be located? I'm guessing your answer is going to be yes.
Yes, 100% yes. It's a tricky balance because the state has set very aggressive green energy targets. And, you know, the Article 10 process was kind of the first step towards involving the state to make sure these projects go forward. There are some communities that are going to be NIMBY, not in my backyard, no matter what. And I understand the state's need to get involved and make sure there's some uniformity across the process. But, you know, the needs of the local community are very important. And we know our community better than anyone. And we need to be the ones that are deciding which areas are prime for growth and which areas need to be preserved. We're the ones that understand, you know, view shed and habitats and, you know, all those things are really important and they need to play a role in the siting process. You know, the solar tsunami is a fun, you know, little phrase, but think about a tsunami, you know, it can overwhelm you. And so I think it is important that the local governments draw a line in the sand and understand what's going to be acceptable and what's not. We have plenty of room to do both in Lewis County. We really do. But, you know, we can't allow the state of New York to just pummel us with energy projects because we have space and Westchester doesn't. You know, that's not fair. So there does need to be a balance. And I think the Article 10 process was striving towards that. We will see how the new process with this new state agency goes because it's brand new and we haven't, you know, we haven't had any projects go through them yet.
Thank you. Here's a question about buried electric lines. Buried lines are more expensive, but would that be possible in order to address potential concerns with visual impacts? Are buried lines being explored?
There's usually always a suitable use case for buried lines, particularly around urban areas or you know, environmentally sensitive areas. So I think that it is always an option that is considered. But the person who asked the question is, you know, recognizing the answer to it as well is it's very costly to do buried transmission lines versus overhead.
Thanks. Rodica, anything on burying lines or no?
I think Bart said it all. Yeah.
Okay. All right, here is a question to National Grid. Is National Grid going to put the rebuild and upgrade of Adirondack to Porter 230 kV in your 2020 capital plan? Very specific question. Since NYPA is upgrading the northern portion of that line to 345.
Right, right. The short answer is no, it's not in our 2020 investment plan. However, we have been looking at that area as well as other areas, studying them extensively to see what potential solutions we could develop if asked.
Okay.
I can add to that question, actually. That portion of the line goes right through Lewis County.
There you go.
We would love to see it expanded. So I think, but to put in a plug for National Grid, you know, National Grid's not going to do it, probably, in my opinion, not anytime soon. The state of New York, if this is their energy goals, they got to step up and help fund this stuff. So that would just be my 2 cents.
Well, we like to hear your 2 cents. I think that was certainly one of the points that Bart was making, that if an upgrade is valuing the National Grid customers, benefiting the National Grid customers for safety, reliability, et cetera, then it makes sense for them to pay for it. But if one of the major reasons for doing an upgrade is to meet the climate and clean energy goals, maybe it makes sense for the rest of the state to pay for some of that too,
Right.
which, you know, I think is fair. Okay, here's a question. Community support was mentioned. Many years ago, NYRE tried to send high-power transmission lines from Marcy to downstate, going right through several small towns, which was fought tooth and nail. Is this going to do a similar thing, high power lines through communities? Want me to try to answer? let me, oh, it looks like Bart might be frozen. Are you frozen?
No, I'm sorry, I got distracted. I heard Westchester County, and being an upstate guy, I kind of was writing a note.
That's okay. So this one, I'll take a shot at answering. It says, it's mentioning a historical issue where NYRE tried to send high power transmission lines from Marcy to downstate, going through many small towns. So, and it was fought tooth and nail. So I'll give an example. I think it was 8 years ago, Governor Cuomo announced the Energy Highway effort, which was about the same issue, the need to upgrade the transmission system. And that process has resulted in 2 major projects, which are still alive, but are still winding their way through permitting processes. And when that effort was launched, there were a lot of competing proposals, which has the benefit of competition and having the market bring lower prices. But it had the negative impact of having many different developers talking about building different transmission lines all over the place. And not all of them were ever going to happen, but they were enough to get everyone riled up. And the state reoriented that process to put a high priority and on using existing rights of way.
Yeah.
So I do think it's safe to say that the great majority of these projects that we're talking about, which are undefined, because we still have to do the analysis to know where the optimal locations are, the great majority of them, though, we would expect would be upgrades to existing lines. And then, as Bart pointed out, in some cases, the most cost-efficient thing to do would be to have some collector stations placed in places where they aren't now. So that might be some new development. But other than that, our expectation is it would be lines going from the wind and solar projects to the main grid and upgrades to the grid itself. Is that fair to say, Bart?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, great job. It is certainly optimizing the use of the existing corridors. It would not be diverting off of that unless there was that conversation and it was, you know, factored in the community impacts, like Ryan was saying, and all the key stakeholders were linked up. That would be, you know, that's the dream state, and then we proactively do that. So yeah, regarding you know, overhead over communities, it is something that I would say is not welcome, and it's more of a issue of, well, how do you then build out the network, and the argument that, well, what's there currently today should be looked at first.
Yeah. So I wouldn't want to say that there'd never be any instances of some brand new areas if it's the most optimal, but taking the energy highway process as a lessons learned, and also to point out that the new Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth Act that passed just this April, put another incentive for rights of way in there in terms of the Article 7 permitting process, that if you were developing or doing an upgrade in existing rights of way, you get sort of a comparatively expedited process for permitting.
And I would add that in some markets we have seen cases where even if there was a new transmission line, a 345 kV line, maybe it's with double circuit capable, but at first it gets built as a single circuit, but then you add additional capacity. So they can be, even in cases of a new line, for instance, you can just build the capability, but you add the capacity later. But in terms of right-of-ways and towers, you keep the same.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We are rapidly running out of time here. The last question on the list I'll ask, and there's a lot more that we didn't get to, which I really appreciate all the folks who have asked questions. The ISO has identified a number of potentially constrained renewable pockets in their latest study. From a generator perspective, which area of the state has the greatest need for transmission development? And it says in parentheses, you can't say all of them. So I guess, Rodica, that's a question for you.
Well, there have been a lot of several pockets identified. One, near Louisville, it's like the Watertown pocket. So I mean, I think it's hard to answer that. The question, there are many potentially existing. I mean, they are in north side. There are projects that we know are already getting curtailed. The north area requires a lot of transmission. So it's more about finding the balance and finding the most effective transmission solutions, as opposed to just picking and choosing. One criteria that I think could make sense is to look at the pockets that have been identified or that might be getting identified in the DPS study, and look where in those pockets have generators already been awarded an ISERDA contract, are they online or not? Because if those projects may have difficulties getting financed, if, for instance, there is already significant congestion being forecast in that area. So it could help projects that have been awarded but are not online, and help add additional capacity there as well.
Okay, thank you. I want to apologize to all the questions I didn't get to, many of who have been written by people I know and love, but I just couldn't get to all these questions. I was trying to hit each of the topics at least once. But we had, I think, over 230 people listening in on today's virtual town hall. From the point of view of ACE New York, our goal was just to raise the issue of transmission. As you can see, it's a very technical issue. It's knotty problems with planning, but our view is that it's a very important piece of the puzzle for having New York achieve its climate and clean energy goals. And unless we solve it, we're not going to get there. And our goal is to get there. I think Ali said something about we appreciate your continued, he had a nice word for badgering, which is what ACE New York does, to try to continually raise these issues and try to make New York a very attractive place for renewable energy development. We have so many New Yorkers who support clean energy, who support climate goals. We have even more New Yorkers that in the last 3 months have recognized the great importance of clean air and public health and resiliency. And we want to be a part of the solution for New York's clean energy goals, but it's challenging to get there, and transmission is one of those challenges. I really appreciate everyone who chimed in, both in the chat, where we had some nice comments, and also all the Q&As. And this This will be posted on our website, free and available to everyone. And again, thank you to Senator Parker, to Ali, to our 3 panelists, Bart, Ryan, and Rodica. I thought we had a lot of good information today, and we could talk for a longer time, but we all have to get on to our lives. So thank you so much. Thank you also to Michaela, Kathleen, Jeff, and Deb, and Joe, who were staffing and planning and sending me questions while we were talking, and to Kaylee as well, who is my boss, the chair of the board of directors of ACE New York. So on behalf of our whole team, thanks so much everyone for joining, and please keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.